think this is probably going to be a bit more of um, a specific dive into the benefits of AI for internal communicators and communications at large. Specifically thinking about, how we might be able to frame AI in our daily life. Moving forward, as well as potentially giving some prompts that we can work with, sharing our best practices and tips, and fielding any questions you all have. So, if anything is coming up, please put that in the chat and we can address that as we move forward. But starting us off, I guess, Mina, you and I have been working together for a while, and you actually were the one that really piqued my interest in AI because you started using it pretty heavily as soon as ChatGPT came out, sending me poems and scripts and things. So, can you describe like how AI functions in your day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I've been playing around with it since about, I think, March. I'm not sure where it actually came out, but this is when I discovered it. And I was like, oh, there's this cool chat that I can talk to and ask anything, and it's going to give me answers and I can just do whatever. But I was very clueless about it, which I think most of us still are. Like, even though I know something about it and I'm still learning, I think we're all in this big unknown and not sure what's going on. So I think learning about it sooner rather than later is definitely going to benefit all of us in our jobs, but also in our lives. So yeah, fun fact about how I used, I think, ChatGPT for the first time was it was Alex's birthday, and I wanted to say happy birthday in a funny way. So I have asked ChatGPT to create a song. I think Shakespeare way. I think that was my style. And then I input a bunch of prompts about Alex, about who she is, what sign she is. So it created this beautiful poem. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I shared it with Alex and I was like, unfortunately, this wasn't me. I can't take the credit. But it was very, very creative, right? So that's a fun way how I started using it. And then later on, I realized that it's very beneficial for my job as well, being in sales and talking to people all day long. Sometimes, especially because English is not my first language, I think it's hard to get the message across. And even if I do, it might not sound in the style of the language, or something might sound more assertive than it is. So I'm using AI to kind of rephrase my emails, for example, right? So if I have something to say, I would put it in kind of a rough draft, and then I would put it in ChatGPT, and I would ask him to maybe rephrase it to make it more personable, or make it more, friendly, or whatever tone that I want to use in that particular situation. So I think that has helped me a lot. I'm also using kind of different ones. I know Grammarly has an extension that's also
Hmm.
kind of AI based.
Yeah.
It's helping me do it directly within the email, so I don't have to kind of go back and forth, which is super helpful. So yeah, I think that it's a very interesting realm of opportunities here. I haven't tested out the images ones. I know
Hmm.
Frank was showing some great examples, which I think are pretty cool. I'm mostly kind of discovering this text generative AI, and I think that's what we're going to focus on more today.
Yes, absolutely. I think that in terms of generating summaries or drafts of content, that's been the main use case for me as well. I think really, in particular, personally, I think that the sort of tone surveillance has been very helpful in my emails. I know that often I can come across maybe a bit more direct in my emails. Maybe it is a way to soften it or to make sure that the tone is hitting in the way it needs to. Because I know that, like for me, I always would have anxiety about emails and how to write them and what's going to be effective. And I can only imagine that that also. Transfers over to larger communications. If I were an internal communicator, let's say, ahead of the communications department, sending out content daily, wanting to make sure it was friendly and professional and persuasive, I might pull my brains out. So, what we can
Exactly.
do actually is let me share a screen share, pop into.
While you do that, I just want
Mhm.
to mention that I think another challenge for communicators is that they have to generate this text every single day, right?
Yeah.
That there is a lot of work they have to put in, even for day-to-day communication. So especially for that type of communication, I think it's most useful when it's HR update or new benefits update, something that's kind of more generic, but we need
Mhm.
to input our information. I think starting off drafts from ChatGPT and kind of having that starting point is super, super useful because it helps you start, and it helps you save time. At the end of the day, all we want to do is save time and be more efficient. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits.
Yeah, it is very much sort of as Frank was talking about, like as an executive assistant or as another member of your team that you can delegate to make sure that you're streamlining your processes and your work streams as much as possible. So starting with a draft or starting from scratch is possible too, but really, making sure that there are another pair of eyes, figuratively in this case, checking your work and making sure that it's the most effective as possible. Um, so what we do have here, just I think we covered most of it in terms of providing efficiency, sort of having it as a superpower skill and making sure that it's a collaborative, team member that you're working with in addition to your regular day to day. But there are a bunch of different ways that you can use AI in your work. I think today we'll be talking about generative AI and about, you know, fine tuning your prompts. As Frank mentioned, like it's great, and hopefully in the long term, you will have like years worth of context in terms of the content that you generated. But starting out now, what is it that we can do with what we have, with the tools available, free or not free, um, and how can we make our prompts, let's say, the most effective?
Yeah, I think we should dive into that. One thing that I would mention before we do so, and I think it's important because I think when all of this kind of the AI revolution started,
Mhm.
most of us, I know I was kind of scared. Like, is this gonna replace my role? Is this gonna replace,
Right.
human role? As also what Frank mentioned earlier, so many jobs are being replaced. Like photographers are not needed because we're generating AI images now. But I think that it's important to emphasize how important human touch is in internal communications. And I
Yeah.
know that from talking to a lot of communicators, from working with a lot of them, um, communication is something that's very sensitive. It requires emotion, empathy, critical thinking, and some of these things are unfortunately or fortunately not supported by AI. So I think it's important to know that even though we have it as you said, like an assistant, right?
Mhm.
We still need internal communicators at the forefront of every organization, and especially in internal comms. Um, and another reason for it is because employees trust those people, right? They're the
Yeah.
faces that they can turn to when they have a feedback or want to talk about sensitive subjects. So that two-way communication is also not really possible using an AI to replace. So I think it's important that we emphasize that
100%.
um, it's not something that can easily be replaced as a role, especially because it's so sensitive and emotional.
Yeah, and wide reaching. There are many different facets to it than just, the content. Jennifer had a question in the chat about any programs that can help build a presentation when you're stuck. So great that you mentioned that because Jennifer, when we were creating this presentation, we actually used an AI generator. It's an extension in Google. I can find it and put it in the chat, or maybe Mina, you can find it and put it in the chat
Yeah.
for you. But yeah, it generated some images, it generated a new theme for the slides, and you can input content, copy any of that data, and then it should intuitively create out the platform or the sales deck or the presentation. So that's something that we can put in the
Yeah,
chat there.
absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna search for it and put it in chat. But I think it's very important that you mentioned this, Jennifer, because you'll see all of the images in our presentation are AI generated, and they're supposed to match the text that we had on the slide. So you'll see where some of the limitations, we didn't want to change the images just
Mhm.
so we can keep it authentic, but just so you can see some of the limitations maybe when creating something like this. But it's a great starting point. We have to say it saved us a lot of time when we
Yeah.
discovered it.
If you're stuck and you need a little inspiration or a little bit of a laugh, this is where we can start from. And then Natasha, you honestly kind of read our mind, we might as well jump into this because we'll talk exactly about tone and about brand voice and how you could potentially weave those things together as you're creating content in AI. So we're going to start very basic, but how to generate AI prompts. Mina, take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So how this is going to be built out is we're going to start with a simple prompt, as you can see
Mhm.
here, which is write a message to a new hire. And if you want to make this interactive and fun for all of us, you can also follow along in ChatGPT or Google Bard, whatever works for you. We have used ChatGPT when we were kind of testing this out. So essentially, we want to take you through a timeline almost of creating the best possible prompt to give you to get the most out of it, right? So if you're starting off and you don't know where to start, and you're like, oh, I need to write a message to the new hire, right? So the first thing that pops up is obviously write me a message that I can send out to my new hire, which is going to give you some results. And if you try it out, it's going to give you a very generic answer that you can then tailor. And exactly what Frank mentioned earlier is that you can continue adding more prompts to make the text better and better, right? So it has that context, so it knows what you already searched for. And if you're in the same kind of chat box, you can continue adding prompts to kind of tailor the text more and more. So we're starting off with a very simple write a message to the new hire. And then after that, we are adding what, Alex?
Well, we're considering the format. So as we go through, once again, this is very high level and sort of simple, but there are signposts that you can have as these would go with any prompt that you're making. So considering the format, a welcome email, an article, a bulleted list, a blog post, giving as much context to how you want the results to come in so that you can further tailor and further refine, and also to make sure that, later you don't have to reformat if it's bullet points. And I'm sure as AI goes on, it becomes more comprehensive in terms of layouts and things. Um, so write an email to a new hire. And then, as I said, you want to be specific. You want to be very, very targeted and sort of define the results. Are you looking for numbers? Are you looking for a specific topic or subject? So write a welcome email to the new hire explaining the onboarding process at ABC Company. And there, maybe you're going to add the website of the company or other things like that if you wanted to. But that will, I mean, when we put this in, Mina, it very quickly was like, oh, I know exactly. And then it became, it was actually quite impressive.
And I would emphasize be specific. Like this is just one example of how you can be specific, but more specific you are, the better outcome you will get, right? So here we have this kind of explain the onboarding company at the ABC Company. But if you know your onboarding process, this is where that human touch comes in.
Yeah.
And you can say, like, explain the onboarding process in a way that on the first day, this is going to happen. Second day, this week, whatever. Make it really, really personable to your organization and how your processes are working, because ChatGPT wouldn't know that, right? It will know how to generate a generic message to the new hire, but it wouldn't know how actually the onboarding process looks like at your organization.
Yeah. And it can pull external data too sometimes. I mean, once again, be cautious in that sometimes data is not up to date, as with ChatGPT stopping at 2021.
Exactly.
But I know we've done this, or when I've played around with this, even in generating content for our company, for Staff Base, it has access to the external messaging and the external data. But obviously, if you're doing internal messaging to a new hire, you have a bit more specific things to cover.
Exactly. And I think that ChatGPT gives better results if you ask me. Like I was comparing ChatGPT and Bard. I like ChatGPT more. It seems more realistic.
Mhm.
Bard, the only kind of advantage I see in Bard is that it has up to date knowledge, right? So if
Yeah.
you're looking for any kind of statistics or anything in the latest 2 or 3 years, Bard is going to be the way to go, just because literally the knowledge is up to June of 2023, right? So yeah, just another thing to kind of consider there, depending on the outcome that you want. Yeah, and then another important thing is to define the length of your text, depending whether you are sending an update that you want to post on your intranet, or you're sending an email newsletter, or it's a Slack communication. You want to define how long you want the text to be. Some ideal email copy lengths are between 50 and 125 words. And apparently, based on the research, this has this is affecting more open rate and read rate by 50%, which is pretty high percentage. But yeah, keeping it short and sweet and concise will also kind of increase that readership. So you can always define how long do you want your text to be.
Yeah, and that would be leveraging your expertise as a communicator, knowing which piece of content or which format lends itself to shorter, longer, etc. James had a great question in the comments about, internal information and privacy concerns. We do have a session after this that will address the more hairy details of it. Obviously, to reiterate that, following company guidelines when it comes to AI usage will be paramount here. And hopefully your company will have something set up, because it's a little bit of the Wild West in the beginning, but I totally think that is a valid concern to have, especially if it's like personal information rather than just guidelines.
Absolutely. And I think that we still don't have guidelines or regulations on this just because it's so new. But we sure, I think that something like this is expected to happen, and every company should have some kind of regulation just to make sure that you are not kind of exposing your internal and confidential data out to the world.
And then alternatively, you could also just use it as a skeleton and then input that data outside of the actual interface of the AI, if that's a concern as well.
Exactly.
And now here we are with
Exactly.
tone. Yes.
Tone.
So I think this is brought up earlier, and I think this has been, at least for me, one of the defining factors for using AI in my regular daily life, making sure that the tone is consistent. I think even for me, as someone who's like neurodivergent, sometimes I don't know where the line is or what I should or shouldn't be saying. So truthfully, having as descriptive and concise language as possible in your prompt to say, I want to sound witty, I want to sound warm, I want to sound encouraging. We've put in, requests for puns. They add emojis sometimes if you're supposed to be encouraging. It's been a real game changer, and I think that with this, you can also sort of carry out your branding or your language guidelines for the company as well. If you know there are certain words that are used, then you can input that. Actually, I think I might have gotten ahead of myself, Mina. Oh, here it is. Speak to your audience. So if you have we've had some examples here. If you refer to your HR department as employee experience, if you have like your mission, your values, some very unique language that is specific to your company, these are things that you can add in to have that extra touch and keep things consistent across the board, and bring your external and internal sort of marketing language together so everything's pretty cohesive and you're telling the same story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think speak to your audience is another big one. And I think it all ties into be specific, right? So we're all being specific about what tone we're using, what audience we're speaking to. And I think audience is very important, because I tested out a few prompts where I am talking to a 4-year-old, for example, explaining something, and then talking to a professor at Harvard University. So the audience is very, very important. And in order to kind of keep it aligned, you can also use your company industry or the size of your company, right? So if you have a company size of 100 people, you can say, you can put in the prompt something like, reach out with this HR update to a fintech company, 100 employees in this area, right? So everything that AI knows about companies up to 100 people in that specific area, it will use in order to kind of make the tone and more relevant content for that audience.
Yeah, we just had somebody who's following along at ChatGPT see the emojis for warm and friendly. I love it. It's like the rockets and the smiley faces. It's been very effective, and it does sort of remind me of all the exciting messages I've received for our internal comms where I was like, oh, that's adorable. So that's just another boon there. But I totally hear what you're saying. And I think that's such a cool exercise as well. Like, talk to a 4-year old, talk to a Harvard professor, because it opens the door for people to be like, okay, I sent out this communication on Wednesday. The feedback I've been getting is that nobody's really sure what I'm talking about, or like this concept is too comprehensive and far-reaching. Is there a way to distill this down and make sure that everybody's getting like the high level points? And then if they want to, we can have a further conversation and we have all this. I just think that like I can only imagine that it saves a bunch of time versus, having to go to a colleague that you're like, you're really great at explaining things, like really great at boiling it down. Um, but yeah, that's such a cool prompt in and of itself.
And I think Caleb has an interesting point here in the chat.
Hmm.
He said, I'm finding it difficult to get the older generation of management or leadership to accept AI and take a step to develop internal usage guidelines. And I think that makes sense. I think every generation is having a hard time accepting new technology, just because I think we, like, I guess, millennials grew up in that tech world. It's easier for us to accept new technology, right? So whatever new comes out, we're like, yes, give me more of that. That's going to make my life easier. But especially for maybe boomers or other generations that are not so
Boomers, Mina. Don't say that. Yeah, but
um,
go.
yeah,
Sorry.
you get what I'm saying exactly. And this is where I would use ChatGPT so I don't sound too assertive because English is not my first language. So
No, but
you
I
know,
I think that's they also made the apt comparison of like it's like when the internet showed up and people
yeah,
were worried about like, their brain waves and things of that nature. Um, but I think that like at least for us, best practices have been starting small, starting simple. Just showing someone or demonstrating like the email thing, I think is a great way in. Like that became part of my daily life so quickly, and it was just a click of a button and a selection. I think AI can seem like this huge like cloud of possibility because it is in a way, but starting small and starting efficiently with those little day-to-day changes could be very helpful. Um, but yeah, that's a topic that I think we'll probably be addressing later on, just in general, because that's really important, especially as you have workforces that are more mixed with intergenerational folks.
yep, absolutely. And just a quick question from Kate here,
Mhm.
and I think it's an important one. Can you input your company's content so that it can learn from your voice, tone, terminology, so that you don't have to insert those prompts with each session? And I think this is super important because yes, Kate, you can definitely do that. So whatever you give him as an give, I don't know if it's him or I don't know how to to talk about. I'm just gonna call it AI. Whatever you give to AI, it's going to recognize the tonality, or how the style of the text, and it can write whatever text you wanted based on what you gave him. So it goes kind of like, here's the example of the text. Please write dot 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 in the style of the text above, for example. So yeah, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, and once again, with Katie as well, she said if the company guidelines are in place, we're able to do that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then the last point to like Chris in the chat, really, it can be generational, it can be age based, but I think like even those that are younger, the idea about AI is still a bit intimidating, I would say. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I think, let me see. One of the other things, one of the sort of stopgaps, not stopgaps, but things to check for, as we had mentioned, Mina, was making sure that you have up-to-date data, not relying it as like a primary source, or if you are looking in for research purposes, like what are the top 5 articles about this, this, and this? That's a great starting point. I wouldn't hang my hat on it just yet, especially as we're moving through the beginning and the medial stages of, AI growth and what it can do.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of questions regarding kind of companies' policies and how some of these folks are not allowed to use ChatGPT.
Mhm.
I think that, I mean, we really don't know anything about that realm, but I think that the use is becoming more abroad, right? So many people, as you can see, all of you in this chat are using it and testing it out. So I think that people are going to be the ones who are going to make changes, even though for companies it's probably scary because they don't want their personal confidential information going out there, and it's certainly not safe. And again, I that's just my opinion on it, just because you don't want to put out any kind of information. But for the time being, you can just start by using it safely, as we mentioned. So use it as a starting point. Don't input any confidential company information, and that's kind of the conclusion. Use it with in a safe and a structured way, even though your company doesn't have one. Use it so that nobody no confidential information are out there, because I think it's super beneficial and it can save a lot of time, and it would be a waste if you wouldn't use something that can help you do the job that you would have done in an hour in 10 minutes. You being more efficient, I don't think it's gonna be harm.
Yeah, I mean, with any new technology, there are benefits and drawbacks, and reticence to use because it does seem like an unstoppable force. It's happening. It's already happened. So now it's about like being personally discerning, which I think, especially in the communication field, those folks really truly have to be every single day. So, yeah, and then relying on the company as well, and advocating for those guidelines, I think is pretty paramount. But I wanted to just quickly say for Amy, in terms of like bias and IP, that is an excellent conversation to have. For the more technical elements, we do have sessions coming up that those folks would be able to address it much better than Mina and I. But in terms of like bias in the platforms, I think that would be really, really cool to explore further. So you can always reach out to Mina and I via LinkedIn. But thank you everybody so much for the session and for the interaction. You all had great questions and great points, and I really enjoyed myself today. Mina?
Thank you so much. I loved all the engagement in the chat, and I hope I'm gonna connect with you all. So, as Alex said, add us on LinkedIn if any questions weren't answered. And yeah, looking forward to what AI would bring next.